The night exploded with the sound of incoming fire. The convoy was already running late when the first rocket-propelled grenade arced out of the darkness and struck the lead Humvee, shredding it in an instant. Shrapnel tore across the road, sparks and flames illuminating the desert night. Sergeant Elena Ramirez hit the dirt without thinking, her cheeks scraping against gravel, her rifle clutched tight. She tasted sand and copper. Her ears rang so violently she couldn't hear her own heartbeat, but her instincts screamed one thing: get moving. Contact. Contact front, someone shouted, muffled through the haze of the blast. Elena pushed herself to her knees, sprinting low toward cover. Bullets cracked past her head, cutting the air with a sound that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. She dove behind the rear axle of the nearest MRAP, slamming her back against thick steel. Around her, chaos unfolded, voices shouting, tracers snapping, the heavy rattle of a .50 cal opening up in retaliation. Private Diaz, barely out of basic, crouched beside her, his rifle trembling in his hands. His eyes were wide, too wide, like a deer cornered by headlights. "Sarge, what do we do?" he stammered. Elena didn't answer right away. She forced herself to breathe, slow and steady, even as her adrenaline screamed for her to panic. She peeked around the axle, spotting muzzle flashes about 200 meters out, coming from a row of crumbling buildings. They were caught in a textbook ambush. She grabbed Diaz's shoulder, squeezing hard enough to snap him out of his spiral. "You keep your head down, eyes sharp. I'll give you targets. Understand?" He swallowed, nodded once, and pressed his helmet tighter against his head as if it would keep the bullets away. Staff Sergeant Connors, their squad leader, darted into view, sliding behind the MRAP with them. His face was smeared with soot, his radio dangling from his chest. "Ramirez, take Diaz and flank left. Pin those bastards down so we can push through." Elena's stomach tightened. That alley to the left was narrow, choked with rubble, the kind of place where ambushers loved to set traps. She wanted to argue, but Connor's eyes burned with urgency. "Yes, Sergeant," she barked, grabbing Diaz by his vest and dragging him with her. They sprinted low, bullets tearing into walls around them, chunks of plaster raining down. The alley loomed like a throat waiting to swallow them. Every footstep echoed. Elena's lungs burned, but she pressed forward, weapon up, every sense screaming for signs of tripwires or movement. Halfway down, the night split with another explosion. The ground buckled, throwing both of them off balance. Diaz went down hard, his helmet clanging against stone. Elena skidded, her palms shredded by debris. She whipped her rifle up just in time to see a shadow emerge from a doorway, an insurgent with an AK leveled straight at them. Her rifle barked twice and the man folded, collapsing into the dirt with a sickening finality. Diaz stared, frozen, his rifle still unfired. "On your feet, Private," she yelled, yanking him up. "You freeze again and you're dead. And so am I." They pushed forward, clearing doorways as they went. Each room was empty, but the gunfire outside told them the fight was far from over. The alley spat them out into a side street overlooking the ambush site. From here they had a clear angle on the shooters. "Set up," Elena ordered. Diaz fumbled but managed to plant his rifle against a broken wall. Elena steadied her own, sighting down the scope. She exhaled slow and squeezed the trigger. One insurgent dropped, then another, the recoil punching against her shoulder. "Suppressing fire," she shouted, and Diaz finally found his nerve, sending wild bursts toward the enemy. Down below, Connors and the rest of the squad advanced, taking advantage of the cover fire. They moved like shadows, coordinated and lethal, until the insurgents realized the trap had turned on them. Their fire faltered, and soon the survivors melted back into the maze of buildings. Silence crept in, broken only by the crackle of flames from the destroyed Humvee. Elena lowered her rifle, sweat dripping into her eyes. Her chest heaved, but she forced herself to stay focused. A single mistake, a single slip of concentration, and they'd all be dead. "Ramirez," Connor's voice crackled over the radio, rough but steady. "Good work. Get your ass back down here. We're moving." She glanced at Diaz, who looked pale but steady now, adrenaline making his hands twitch. She clapped him on the shoulder. "Not bad, Private. You're still alive. That's step one." He gave her a weak grin, though his eyes betrayed how shaken he was. They regrouped with the others, the convoy now reduced to smoldering wreckage and battered survivors. The lieutenant was already barking into his radio, trying to get air support and a recovery team. But Elena noticed something others missed: the faint, wet cough of a wounded soldier nearby. She followed the sound and found Corporal Jensen sprawled beside the wrecked Humvee, shrapnel buried deep in his side. His blood pooled black in the dim light. "Elena," he rasped, his voice strained. Don't let them laugh at me. Not like this." Her throat tightened. "Nobody's laughing, Corporal. Stay with me. Medics are coming." But Jensen shook his head, clutching her arm with surprising strength. His other hand trembled as it brushed at the tattoo inked across his forearm, the unit crest, bold and defiant. This means something. You tell them that. You tell them." His voice cracked, breath rattling in his chest, then faded. She felt the grip on her arm loosen. His eyes glassed over. He was gone. For a long moment, Elena stayed there, her hand pressed to his cooling skin, the weight of his words heavier than the firefight they'd just survived. "Ramirez." Connor's bark snapped her out of it. "We're moving now." She swallowed hard, stood, and forced her face back into the mask of a soldier. She'd seen death before, but Jensen's last plea dug deep. The ink on his arm wasn't just decoration. It was a story, a mark of belonging, of sacrifice. And now it was her burden to carry. The convoy, reduced and battered, pulled out under cover of darkness, leaving the burning wreck behind. Every bump in the road jostled Elena's bruised body, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Jensen's last words. She knew what awaited when they returned to base. The laughter, the crude jokes soldiers used to cover their own fear. She'd heard them before. But not this time. She wouldn't let Jensen's memory be reduced to that. Back at the FOB, the squad filed in, exhausted, faces gray with smoke and loss. The air smelled of diesel and dust. Soldiers from other units lounged nearby, watching with detached curiosity. One of them, a cocky corporal with 2 clean fatigues, smirked. "Rough night, huh? Guess some people just don't have the luck." Elena froze, fists tightening. She wanted to slam him against the wall, to make him understand. But instead, she stepped forward, pulled off her glove and rolled up her sleeve. Her own ink gleamed under the harsh lights. The same unit tattoo Jensen had died clutching. "You think this is luck?" she said, her voice low but razor sharp. "You think these marks are for jokes? Jensen died tonight with this on his arm." He didn't laugh. "And neither should you." The room fell silent. Even the veteran leaning against the wall, usually the loudest in mocking others, dropped his gaze. For once there was no comeback, no snide remark. Just silence. Elena turned, her jaw set, and walked past them, each step echoing with the promise she'd made on that battlefield. She didn't know what the next mission would bring, but she knew one thing. She'd carry Jensen's words with her. And she'd make damn sure nobody forgot. The desert morning broke in pale light, washing the forward operating base in dusty gray. Helicopters droned overhead, rotors thumping like an endless heartbeat, while Humvees rumbled through the motor pool, their engines coughing smoke. Inside the barracks, Sergeant Elena Ramirez sat on the edge of her bunk, still in yesterday's uniform, boots untied, staring at her hands. They shook slightly, though she wouldn't admit it. Jensen's last words kept replaying, as clear as if he were still whispering in her ear. Her squad moved around her, packing gear for the next patrol. Private Diaz fumbled with his magazine pouches, trying to hide the tremor in his fingers. Staff Sergeant Connors barked at him, his voice like gravel. "You load those wrong, Private, you're dead weight out there." Again. "Yes, Sergeant." Diaz stammered, his face burning red. Elena glanced up, her eyes catching Connors. For a second, his hard mask faltered, and she saw the same exhaustion in him that she felt herself. But then it was gone, replaced by the steel of command. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not here. The door banged open and Lieutenant Harper strode in, clipboard tucked under his arm, his jaw set tight. "Listen up. We've got intel on the bastards who hit us last night. Command wants payback. We're rolling out in 30. A murmur went through the room. Payback meant blood and everyone knew it. Elena tightened her boots, pulling the laces until her palms hurt. Her body ached from the ambush, her ribs bruised, her hands raw, but there was no room for excuses. She grabbed her rifle, checked the chamber and stood. On the way out she caught Diaz staring at her. He whispered, "You really think we're ready for this?" She should have told him yes, should have lied to steady him. But she'd made a promise to herself, no more lies. "Doesn't matter if we're ready," she said, sliding a magazine into her rifle. "We're going anyway." The convoy rolled out under a rising sun, engines growling, dust trailing behind them like ghosts. Elena sat in the back of the MRAP, helmet pressed to the steel wall, the smell of oil and sweat thick in the air. Across from her, Diaz clutched his rifle, lips moving silently in what looked like a prayer. Connors sat beside him, stone-faced, one hand on his radio, the other gripping the seat as if he could steer the whole mission through sheer force of will. 30 clicks east, Harper's voice crackled over the comms. That's where they melted back into last night. Intel says they got a weapons cache hidden out there. We're going to find it, secure it, and send a message. The words sounded simple. They always did before boots hit the ground. By midday they reached the village, a cluster of crumbling buildings and narrow alleys, the kind of place where eyes hid behind curtains and silence screamed louder than words. The MRAPs rolled in slow, tires crunching over debris. Kids peeked from doorways then vanished. Women pulled veils tighter over their faces. This place stinks of trouble, Connors muttered. Always does, Elena replied, her rifle resting on her knee. They dismounted in pairs, boots hitting the dirt. The heat wrapped around them like a suffocating blanket, sweat soaking through uniforms within minutes. Elena's squad took the western edge, moving in stacks, clearing doorways one by one. The first house was empty, just broken furniture and dust. The second had a family huddled in the corner, wide-eyed and silent, their fear so thick it made Elena's stomach twist. She lowered her weapon, signaling them to stay put, then moved on. At the third building they found something different. Crates stacked against the wall, covered by a dirty tarp. Connors ripped it away, revealing boxes of ammunition, grenades, and 2 RPG launchers. Bingo, he said, his voice grim. Diaz whistled under his breath, earning a sharp glare from Elena. Quiet. We don't know if this place is wired. As if summoned by her words, a gunshot cracked outside. Then another. Shouts erupted, boots pounding against dirt. Contact east side. Harper's voice roared through the comms. Connors cursed. Ramirez, Diaz, set up a perimeter. Hold this cache. I'll rally the others. Elena dragged Diaz toward the doorway, taking position behind the thick wall. She sighted down the street, spotting insurgents darting between buildings, AKs flashing. Bullets smacked against stone, sending chips flying. Suppressive fire, she shouted. Diaz opened up, his shots wild but loud, enough to force the enemy to duck. Elena picked her targets carefully, dropping one, then another. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she kept firing, teeth clenched. A grenade clattered into the street, rolling toward them. Down, she screamed, yanking Diaz by the vest and throwing them both to the floor. The blast ripped through the air, showering them with dirt and debris. Ears ringing, Elena scrambled up, coughing. Diaz, you good? He nodded, dazed but breathing. Then keep shooting. Minutes bled into each other, the firefight dragging on, every second a razor's edge. The rest of the squad fought to push the insurgents back, but more kept coming, pouring out of alleys like ants. Then Harper's voice crackled, panicked. We're cut off. Need reinforcements now. Connors barked orders, pulling men into defensive positions. Elena's squad was pinned, the cache their only cover. She leaned against the wall, mind racing. If they stayed, they'd be overrun. But abandoning the cache meant letting the enemy rearm. Ramirez. Connors called from across the street, his voice hoarse. Options. She didn't hesitate. Blow it. Connors stared at her for a heartbeat, then nodded grimly. Do it. Elena sprinted back inside, her pack slamming against her shoulders. She yanked out a block of C4, hands steady despite the chaos. Diaz's eyes went wide. You're serious? Dead serious. Cover me. She planted the charge against the crates, wiring it with practiced speed. Sweat dripped into her eyes, but her fingers never faltered. She thought of Jensen, of the tattoo inked on his arm, of what he'd said about meaning. This was the meaning. Not letting the enemy laugh, not letting them take more lives with stolen weapons. Charge set, she yelled, sprinting out. Connors waved her toward the fallback point. Detonate on my mark. They pulled back under fire, bullets snapping inches from their heads. Elena slammed against a wall, thumb hovering over the clacker. Now. Connors roared. She squeezed. The explosion tore through the building, fireball erupting skyward, shockwave flattening anyone too close. The ground shook beneath their boots. Insurgents screamed, scattering as flames consumed the cache. For a moment, silence hung over the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of fire. Then the squad regrouped, battered but alive. Harper stormed up, his face red with fury. What the hell was that? Do you have any idea the intel value of that cache? Elena met his glare, unflinching. Do you have any idea the body count if they'd taken it back? Sir. Connor stepped between them, his tone iron. Decisions made, Lieutenant. And it saved our asses. Harper clenched his jaw but said nothing more. He stormed off to bark at the radio operator instead. The squad exhaled in unison, exhaustion settling like lead. Diaz slumped against the wall, shaking his head. I thought we were dead for sure. You weren't, Elena said, checking her rifle. Because we made the right call. Connors clapped her shoulder, heavy but approving. Ramirez, you've got instincts. Don't lose them. Back at the FOB that night, the mood was heavier than before. They'd survived, yes, but the cost of their choices weighed on them. Elena sat outside the barracks, cleaning her rifle under the dim glow of a floodlight. The desert stretched endless around her, silent and indifferent. Diaz sat beside her, staring at the tattoo on her arm. Jensen had the same one, didn't he? She nodded, not looking up. Yeah. You think he'd be proud of today? Elena paused, the brush still in her hand. She thought of Jensen's last breath, his plea not to let anyone laugh. She thought of the cash, the fire, the lives saved. Yeah, she said finally, her voice quiet but certain. I think he would. And yet, as the night deepened and the base settled into uneasy sleep, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that today's decision had lit a fuse. One that wouldn't stop burning until it blew up in their faces. The base woke before dawn to the rumble of generators and the shrill bark of orders cutting through the air. Elena Ramirez stood in formation with her squad, sweat already gathering beneath her body armor, though the sun hadn't cleared the horizon. The night had been short, restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fireball from the cache detonation, felt the shockwave crawl up her bones, and heard Harper's angry voice warning her that she'd crossed a line. Now the line was about to be tested. The company had been ordered into a full sweep. Intelligence suggested that the insurgents weren't just a loose band, they were organized, supplied, and emboldened. Command wanted to root them out before another convoy got shredded on the highway. Elena's squad moved through the motor pool, loading gear into the MRAPs. Connors oversaw the preparations, barking orders with practiced efficiency, but even his gravelly voice carried an edge of unease. The mission wasn't going to be routine. Everyone could feel it. Private Diaz shuffled beside Elena, fumbling with his radio batteries. Feels like we stirred up a hornet's nest, he muttered. Elena checked her weapon, chambered around, and glanced at him. Good. Means they're angry. Angry makes mistakes. Diaz gave a shaky laugh, but his eyes darted nervously. He was learning, but fear still gnawed at him. Elena didn't blame him. She'd been that terrified once, too, fresh out of training, pretending courage was something you could fake. By the time they rolled out, the sun was a blinding white disk climbing into a merciless sky. Dust trailed behind the convoy like a signal flare, visible for miles. Elena sat cramped in the back of the MRAP, helmet pressed to her head, rifle across her lap. Connors briefed them as they bumped along the uneven road. We're sweeping the Alrashad sector. It's dense, full of rat holes and sight lines. Keep your heads on a swivel. Ramirez, your point once we dismount. Yes, Sergeant, Elena said steady. The village came into view hours later, a sprawl of mud brick buildings, narrow alleys, and rooftops that seemed to lean inward like watchful faces. The convoy rumbled to a halt just outside. Birds scattered at the sound of engines. Silence followed. Dismount, Connors ordered. Boots hit dirt. The squad fanned out, rifles up, eyes scanning windows and shadows. Elena led them forward, her senses stretched thin, every sound magnified, the creak of a shutter, the bark of a distant dog, the crunch of gravel underfoot. The first few houses were empty, stripped bare. In one they found cooking fires still smoldering, food half prepared. Whoever lived there had left in a hurry. They knew we were coming, Diaz whispered. Or they wanted us here, Elena replied. They pushed deeper, clearing buildings, marking them with chalk. The streets narrowed, alleys twisting like veins. Elena felt the weight of unseen eyes on her back. Then it came. The crack of a sniper round split the air. The bullet smacked into the wall inches from Connor's head, showering him with dust. The squad dove for cover, shouting. Sniper. Rooftop, 2 o'clock. Elena called, sighting down her scope. She caught the glint of a scope on a distant roof and fired. The figure vanished, but the silence didn't return. Instead, it shattered into chaos. Automatic fire erupted from alleys, rooftops, and windows. The squad was caught in a kill zone. Return fire. Push forward. Connors roared. Elena and Diaz scrambled behind a low wall, bullets hammering it like rain. She popped up, squeezing off shots, dropping a gunman leaning out of a window. Diaz fired wildly, his rounds chewing into the plaster of a nearby building. Controlled bursts. Elena snapped. Make them count. The air filled with smoke and screams. A grenade exploded nearby, the blast throwing 2 men off their feet. Elena's ears rang, but she forced herself forward, leading Diaz toward a narrow alley that offered a better angle. Inside, shadows swallowed them. The sound of gunfire muffled, but not by much. They moved quick, clearing corners, rifles sweeping. At the far end, they spotted two insurgents reloading, unaware. Elena didn't hesitate. Her rifle barked twice, both men crumpling before they could react. Diaz froze for a moment, staring at their bodies, his face pale. "Keep moving," she ordered, pushing past him. They burst out onto a side street, catching the insurgents' flank. Elena opened fire, her rounds precise, forcing the enemy to scatter. Connors saw the opening and rallied the rest of the squad, driving forward through the chaos. Minutes stretched into a brutal eternity, but slowly the tide shifted. The insurgents broke, retreating into the maze of alleys. The gunfire sputtered, then faded. "Clear!" Connors shouted, his voice raw. The squad regrouped, battered but alive. Two men were down, one with shrapnel in his leg, the other bleeding from a shoulder wound. Medics worked fast, their hands slick with blood. Elena leaned against a wall, chest heaving, sweat stinging her eyes. She glanced at Diaz, who sat slumped nearby, his rifle across his knees. His hands trembled, but his eyes burned with something new, not fear but anger. "They set us up," he said, his voice hoarse. "They knew we'd come. They wanted us here." Elena nodded. "And we made it out anyway." Connors joined them, his face grim. "Command wants us to keep pressing. Says we're close to their command cell." Diaz groaned. "We're half broken already." "How the hell?" "Orders?" Connors cut him off. "We don't get to pick the fight." They pushed on, deeper into the labyrinth. Each corner felt like a gamble, each doorway a possible ambush. Elena's nerves stretched tighter with every step. Then they found it. A hidden room beneath a mosque, accessed through a broken grate. Inside were maps, radios, and documents scattered across a table. Evidence of coordination, of planning. Connors ordered everything photographed and secured. But there was more. On the far wall hung a flag, its colors faded but its message clear. Insignia Elena didn't recognize, organized, disciplined, not just local fighters. Something bigger. Connors cursed under his breath. This isn't just an insurgent cell. This is a network. Before they could process, gunfire erupted outside. Shouts echoed through the village. The insurgents weren't retreating, they were regrouping. "Trap. Ramirez, Diaz, cover the entrance. Hold them off." Connors barked. Elena took position behind a stack of crates, Diaz beside her. She sighted down the narrow doorway, heart pounding. Shadows flickered, then figures charged. She fired, each shot cracking like thunder in the confined space. Diaz followed, his rounds tearing into the entryway. Bodies piled in the doorway, but more pressed forward. Bullets tore through the room, ricocheting off walls. Elena ducked, ears ringing. Dust filled the air. "We can't hold this." Diaz shouted, panic edging his voice. "Yes, we can." Elena snapped, firing again. Connors pulled a radio to his mouth, calling for support. Static answered. The walls shook with another explosion, dust raining down. Then Elena saw it, a bundle rolling across the floor, small and deadly. "Grenade!" she screamed, diving for Diaz. The blast ripped through the room, heat and force slamming into her. Pain exploded in her side, ears filled with white noise. She hit the ground hard, vision swimming. Through the haze, she saw Diaz crawling toward her, blood streaking his face. His voice was muffled, distant. "Sarge. Stay with me." She tried to answer, but her mouth filled with copper. Darkness edged her vision, pulling her under. The last thing she saw was Connors dragging her by the vest, his face set in grim determination, bullets still hammering the walls. Elena Ramirez woke to the sound of rotor blades. Her body jolted with every vibration, the metal floor beneath her rattling as the helicopter cut through the air. Her side burned like fire, every breath a knife twisting in her ribs. She tried to move, but hands pressed her down. "Stay still, Sergeant. You're hit," a medic shouted over the roar. Her vision swam, the world swaying between blurs of khaki and blood. She caught a glimpse of Diaz strapped to the bench opposite her, his face pale and streaked with dirt. His helmet was gone, bandages wrapped around his temple. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second, fear and relief tangled together. Then the bird lurched, banking hard, and she blacked out again. When she opened her eyes next, the ceiling above her was white, buzzing with fluorescent lights. The smell of antiseptic filled her lungs, sharp and sterile. A nurse leaned over her, adjusting in 4. "You're in the field hospital. You made it," the nurse said, voice calm. Elena tried to sit up, but pain clamped down, forcing a groan from her throat. The nurse pushed her gently back. Shrapnel tore into your side. We got it out, but you'll be sore for weeks. You're lucky. Lucky. She thought of the explosion, the bodies in the doorway, Connors dragging her through gunfire. Luck felt like an insult. She drifted in and out for hours, time a blur of painkillers and distant voices. When she finally steadied, Connors appeared at her bedside, still in dusty fatigues, eyes bloodshot. You gave us a scare, he said, voice rough. How many did we lose? Elena asked. Connors' jaw tightened. 2. Corporal Mason and Private Ellis. Diaz took a hit, but he's fine. Well, you're stubborn as hell. Elena swallowed, the weight of their absence settling heavy on her chest. We had that room. We got the intel, Connors cut her off. That's what matters. Command is tearing through it now. Looks like you were right. This isn't just a local cell. It's a network, supplied and organized. We stirred something big. Elena closed her eyes. Stirred something big. And paid the price. The next few days crawled by. She forced herself out of bed sooner than the medics wanted, ignoring the pain. Every time she limped across the ward, she saw the faces of the wounded, men and women torn apart, stitched back together, waiting to be sent home or back out. Some stared blankly, others joked too loud, the fragile humor of soldiers too close to the edge. Diaz visited one evening, awkward in the chair beside her bed. His head was bandaged, but his hands were steady now. He fiddled with his dog tags before finally speaking. I froze again, he admitted quietly. When that grenade came in. You saved me. Elena studied him, the boyish face hardened by days of fire. You didn't run. That matters. He shook his head. Doesn't feel like enough. I keep thinking, maybe if I'd moved faster, Alice would still be alive. The words hit Elena like a punch. She knew the guilt, carried it herself after every loss. She reached over, gripping his wrist. Listen. You can tear yourself apart with what-ifs, or you can make sure the next fight goes different. That's the only choice we get. Diaz swallowed, then nodded slowly. Next fight, I won't freeze. A week later, Elena was back in the fight, whether she was ready or not. The medics cleared her for light duty, but Connors ignored the word light. The squad needed her. They rolled out at dawn again, another sweep, this time deeper into hostile territory. Intel from the captured documents had pointed to a safe house, a hub for weapons and planning. Command wanted it raided. The MRAP rattled over cracked roads, dust choking the air. Elena adjusted her vest, the scar on her side aching with each bump. Diaz sat across from her, sharper now, jaw tight. Connors briefed them, his voice steady but clipped. This isn't a patrol. This is a strike. We go in hard, clear fast, and hold until backup arrives. No mistakes. They reached the outskirts of a small compound ringed by walls. From the distance it looked abandoned. Too quiet. Ramirez, your point? Connors said, as if her injury hadn't happened. She nodded, moving to the front of the stack. The gate loomed ahead, rusted metal hanging crooked. She signaled, then kicked it open. The squad flowed in, rifles raised. The courtyard was empty, dust swirling. Doors lined the walls, shut tight. Elena's stomach twisted. Something's off, she murmured. A shot cracked from above. A lookout on the rooftop. She dropped him before he could fire again, but the silence shattered. Doors burst open, insurgents flooding the courtyard. Contact! Connors roared. The air turned into chaos, bullets tearing across the open space. Elena dove behind a crumbling wall, firing back. Diaz took position beside her, his shots controlled this time, precise. Grenades rolled in, explosions tearing chunks from the walls. Dust and screams filled the air. Elena's ears rang, her side burned, but she kept firing. Connors shouted orders, rallying the squad into a defensive line. Hold this ground. Hold. But they were outnumbered, surrounded. The safe house wasn't a hub, it was a trap. Elena spotted movement through the haze, men dragging crates toward the far wall. Not weapons. Explosives. They were going to bring the whole place down. Connors, she yelled. They're rigging it. He cursed. We can't hold here. Fall back. Fall back. The squad began pulling toward the gate, covering each other in bursts. Elena and Diaz held the rear, laying down fire. Bullets stitched the ground around them, forcing them low. Move, she shouted, pushing Diaz ahead. A round clipped her helmet, spinning her vision. She stumbled, nearly falling, but forced herself forward. The gate was close, just meters away. Then the first explosion ripped through the compound. Fire rolled across the courtyard, the shockwave hurling bodies. Elena hit the dirt, heat searing her face. She crawled, coughing, dragging herself toward the gate. Connors appeared, grabbing her arm, hauling her through as more blasts rocked the ground. The safe house collapsed in a roar of smoke and fire, the sky turning black with dust. Outside the walls, the squad regrouped, battered and bleeding but alive. Diaz coughed, spitting grit, his hands shaking. "They knew," he rasped. "They knew we were coming." Elena stared back at the burning ruin, her chest heaving. Not just knew, they'd been waiting. This wasn't random. Connor's face was stone. Intel was fed to us. Someone set us up. The words hung heavy, more dangerous than bullets. If the enemy had eyes inside their own intel channels, nowhere was safe. Back at the FOB, the tension was palpable. Harper chewed them out for failing to secure the safe house, but even his anger felt hollow. Command couldn't ignore the truth. The enemy was playing a bigger game. That night, Elena sat outside the barracks, staring at the stars buried behind desert haze. Diaz sat beside her, quiet. After a long silence, he spoke. "You think we can win this?" Elena didn't answer right away. She thought of Jensen, of Ellis, of the fire consuming the safe house. She thought of the tattoo inked on her arm, the mark of belonging, of sacrifice. Finally she said, "I think we can fight. And sometimes that's all you can do." But deep down she felt it, the war wasn't just on the streets and rooftops. It was in the shadows, in the whispers of betrayal. And if someone was feeding them false intel, the next fight would be worse. Much worse. The desert night was colder than anyone expected. The fire from the destroyed safe house still glowed faintly on the horizon, an orange smear against the dark sky, but at forward operating base Kestrel, the mood was darker than the night. The squad had survived, but their narrow escape was a scar on everyone's faces. Sergeant Elena Ramirez sat at the edge of a cot inside the dimly lit barracks, still in dusty fatigues. She hadn't slept since they got back. Her ribs throbbed with every breath, the scar from her last wound angry and sore. But she couldn't close her eyes. Every time she tried, the roar of collapsing stone and the sight of Ellis' lifeless body came back sharper. Across the barracks, Private Diaz tossed on his bunk. Even in half-light she saw the tension in his shoulders, the same unspoken question that kept circling in her own mind. Who fed us into that trap? Captain Connors entered quietly, his face shadowed. He carried a file under his arm, but the slump in his posture told Ramirez more than any folder could. He stopped at the center of the room, glancing at the squad. Only half of them were there now, the others in the field hospital or gone forever. "They're saying intel came from Division Command," Connors finally said, voice low. "Satellite confirmation, intercepted chatter. Looked solid." "Solid my ass," Corporal Green muttered from his bunk. "Those bastards were waiting with a full platoon and demo packs. Someone's laughing at us right now." Connors didn't argue. He set the file down on the table and leaned forward on his hands. "We all know the truth. We've got a leak. Someone fed the enemy the exact time and target." The room went quiet, heavy. Diaz finally sat up. "So what do? We just keep walking into their setups." "No," Connors said firmly. His eyes swept the room, landing on Ramirez. "We dig. Command will do their official investigation, but you all know how slow that'll be. We don't have time. If there's a traitor, more of our people are going to die. We find out who's passing the intel and we cut them off." Ramirez felt the weight of his gaze. "You're asking us to run an op inside our own lines," she said. "I'm asking you to survive," Connors replied. The next morning, the squad received orders for a new mission. Escort duty for a supply convoy pushing out to an isolated checkpoint in the southern desert. On paper it was routine. But in the barracks, Connors made it clear. "This mission isn't about supplies. It's bait," he said, tapping the map laid out across the table. "If they know we're coming again, we'll know the leak's still live. And we'll catch whoever tipped them off." The squad rolled out with the convoy at first light, a line of trucks kicking dust across the barren landscape. Ramirez sat in the lead MRAP, rifle across her lap, eyes scanning endless dunes. The air shimmered with heat though the sun had barely risen, and every shadow on the horizon looked like movement. Diaz manned the gun turret above, his silhouette sharp against the sky. Green drove, muttering curses at the rutted road. Ramirez listened to the radio chatter. Calm, routine, too normal. For the first hours nothing happened. The convoy pushed deeper, through canyons and dried riverbeds, the silence gnawing at everyone. Then, near midday, a plume of dust rose ahead. "Possible contact," Ramirez called. The convoy slowed. Figures appeared on the ridgeline, too many moving fast. Gunfire erupted, rattling off the rocks. The convoy lurched into chaos, trucks swerving, engines roaring. Ambush! Ambush! Diaz shouted from above, the .50 cal hammering thunder into the canyon. Ramirez's blood turned cold. They knew again. This wasn't coincidence. Bullets shredded the lead truck, sending it crashing into the canyon wall. Men scrambled from the back, diving for cover. RPG streaks lit the sky, explosions shaking the ground. Ramirez fired into the ridgeline, taking down shadows between bursts of dust. The air was alive with echoes, ricochets, screams. She saw one of the convoy drivers clutch his chest and fall from the cab. Another truck's engine caught fire, smoke pouring upward. Push through. Don't stop. Connor's voice bellowed over comms. The MRAP roared forward, Green gritting his teeth as rounds pinged off the armor. Diaz fired in wide arcs, forcing the insurgents back. But the canyon was narrow, perfect for a kill box. Ramirez's instinct screamed. This wasn't about supplies. This was about them. The ambush was tailored, deliberate. They broke through the far end of the canyon after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the surviving trucks limping into open desert. Behind them, the canyon burned with smoke and fire. Bodies lay in the wreckage, both theirs and the enemy's. In the aftermath, Ramirez sat on the MRAP step, helmet off, sweat streaking dirt across her face. Diaz climbed down, face pale but steady. They knew. Again, he said flatly. Ramirez nodded. Which means the leak is inside command. Maybe higher than we thought. Connors gathered them in a tight circle, his voice low. This stays between us. We'll file the official report, but the leak isn't just a hunch anymore. 2 traps in a row? No doubt. Until we figure this out, trust nobody outside this circle. The squad nodded grimly. The war was already hell, but now the battlefield wasn't just outside the wire. It was inside their own chain of command. The following nights were restless. Every mission order felt poisoned, every report suspect. The squad began watching not just the enemy but their own officers, their own interpreters, even the radio operators. Ramirez found herself studying faces in the chow hall, wondering which smile was false, which handshake hid betrayal. The paranoia ate at her more than bullets ever had. One night, while the base slept under the buzz of generators, Connors called Ramirez and Diaz into the comms tent. He held a printed dispatch in his hand, eyes dark. This order just came down, he said. Command wants us to hit another compound tomorrow. Says it's a priority target. Diaz swore. Another setup. Maybe, Connors said. Maybe not. But here's the thing, this order wasn't routed through the usual channels. It came direct, hand-delivered from Division HQ. Ramirez frowned. Which means if it's a trap, the leak isn't just in the FOB. It's at the top. Connors nodded grimly. So we do it different. We don't tell the drivers, we don't tell the interpreters. Just us. Squad only. If the enemy still knows we're coming, then the rot goes all the way up. The next day, the squad rolled out under radio silence. No chatter, no convoy, just their MRAPs and rifles. They moved fast, cutting across dry plains toward the target compound. For the first time in weeks, there was no ambush waiting. The compound was real, filled with stockpiled weapons, maps, and equipment. The raid was clean, efficient. But the proof wasn't in the weapons they seized, it was in the silence of the road there. Back at base, Connors gathered them again. Now we know. Someone in Division HQ fed us into those traps. Someone high enough to manipulate mission orders. Ramirez felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just war anymore. It was betrayal from the inside, and until they uncovered who, every mission was a roll of the dice with lives at stake. That night, Diaz sat beside her outside the barracks, both staring into the desert. What if it's bigger than just one guy? He asked. What if it's a whole chain pulling strings? Ramirez didn't answer right away. She thought of Ellis, of Jensen, of the ambushes designed like cages. Finally she said, then we cut one string at a time. Or we hang. The wind blew hot and dry across the sand, carrying with it the distant echo of gunfire. The war outside never stopped, but now another war had begun inside. And Ramirez knew this one would be the most dangerous yet. The desert base was quiet in the dead of night, but the quiet never fooled Ramirez anymore. She had learned the silence was like a stretched wire, it hummed with tension, ready to snap. She sat on an ammo crate just outside the barracks, cleaning her rifle by headlamp, when Connors stepped out of the shadows. We move tonight, he said, his voice low enough to be carried off by the hum of the generators. Ramirez looked up sharply. Move where? Connors unfolded a slip of paper from his breast pocket. Division HQ. I got a name. Lieutenant Colonel Harlow. He's been pushing these mission orders straight down the chain without oversight. Too convenient. Too clean. Diaz, who'd been dozing on a nearby cot, sat upright. You're saying a colonel is feeding the enemy? That's suicide to accuse. Connors nodded grimly. Which is why we don't accuse. We watch. We gather proof. Then we decide. Ramirez studied him for a long moment, the edge of mistrust cutting sharp in her chest. But Connors' eyes were steady, the kind of steady that came only from men who'd carried too many coffins. She nodded once. Then let's go hunting. The drive to Division HQ was short but tense. They rolled out in a single Humvee, headlights dimmed, sand whipping around them in the wind. No radio chatter, no convoy, just the three of them moving like ghosts. The headquarters compound was larger than their forward base, a maze of tents and prefab buildings, all fenced with razor wire. Guards at the gate waved them through after Connors flashed his ID, none the wiser. Inside, the compound buzzed with the late-night rhythm of war. Clerks hunched over laptops, officers huddled around map tables, radios crackling with distant gunfire. It smelled of coffee, ink, and sweat. Connors led them straight to a drab office building near the center. A single light glowed under the doorframe. The plaque read, LTC. Harlow. They didn't knock. Connors pushed the door open and the three slipped inside like shadows. The office was neat to the point of suspicion. Files stacked perfectly, maps pinned with colored markers, a coffee mug still steaming. But what drew Ramirez's eye was the open laptop on the desk. Lines of text scrolled fast across the screen, encrypted messages feeding out through a secure channel. Got you, Diaz muttered. Connors motioned him to start downloading the logs to a flash drive. Ramirez moved to the window, keeping watch. Every second the air seemed to thicken, as if the room itself knew they were trespassing. Suddenly footsteps echoed in the hall. Hurry, Ramirez hissed. Diaz yanked the drive free just as the doorknob turned. Connors pulled the door open himself, masking their presence as if they belonged there. And in walked Lieutenant Colonel Harlow. He froze, eyes narrowing instantly. His uniform was crisp, his jaw sharp, but the flicker in his gaze betrayed recognition. What are you doing in my office? Connors smiled like it was nothing. Routine check. Command requested a sweep of all secure comms. Harlow's lips curled faintly. At 2 a.m? Ramirez's grip tightened on her rifle. The silence stretched. Then Harlow's hand shifted toward the desk, toward the side drawer. Ramirez spoke first, voice like steel. Don't. Harlow froze. His eyes darted to her, then to Connors, then to the laptop. He realized instantly. Connors stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You've been selling us out. Feeding them our routes, our targets. How many of our people died because of you, Colonel? Harlow's face didn't flinch. Instead he smiled. You think you've uncovered something. You don't know the half of it. Before anyone could move, he slammed his palm down on the desk. Somewhere deep in the compound, alarms wailed to life. Shit, move. Connors barked. They bolted out of the office as soldiers spilled into the hallway. Ramirez fired a warning burst overhead, scattering them long enough to push through the exit. The compound erupted with chaos, guards scrambling, sirens flashing. They sprinted to the Humvee, bullets sparking off the gravel as they dove inside. Green was at the wheel this time, waiting with the engine hot. He slammed the gas and the Humvee roared through the gate, smashing aside the barrier. Tracer fire chased them into the desert. They drove for miles before stopping, finally pulling into an abandoned fuel depot north of the base. Dust hung thick in the air as the Humvee idled. Connors pulled the flash drive from Diaz's hand and jammed it into a field laptop. The screen lit up with lines of intercepted comms, dates, mission orders, coordinates, proof enough to hang a dozen traitors. But one message stood out, flagged in red. It wasn't just chatter. It was a direct transmission. And it wasn't from Harlow. Ramirez read it aloud. Supply diversion successful. Next objective, eliminate Ramirez. She knows too much. The silence that followed was suffocating. They want you dead, Diaz whispered. Ramirez stared at the screen, her heartbeat steadying into a cold rhythm. She had faced bullets, bombs, knives, and fire. But seeing her name in enemy code was different. It was personal. Connors exhaled slowly. It's bigger than Harlow. He's just a cog. Someone higher up is running this pipeline, and now they know we're onto them. Ramirez closed the laptop, her decision already made. Then we hit back before they finished the job. The following week blurred into a game of shadows. The squad couldn't trust Division HQ anymore, so they operated in the margins. Fake mission reports, silent convoys, sudden raids without warning. Each one gave them pieces of the puzzle. Weapons caches that should have been guarded were stripped bare. Supply lines were mysteriously cut before convoys arrived. Local informants turned up dead days after contact. And always the same echo: someone inside was feeding the insurgents with precision. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Patrols started targeting their squad specifically. Twice, RPGs hit their vehicles within minutes of departure. Once, a sniper round missed Diaz's head by inches. Ramirez barely slept. Every night she lay awake, replaying Ellis' last laugh, Jensen's blood, the ambushes. Every death was a thread pulling her deeper into the knot. One evening, after another day of tense silence, Connors gathered the squad in the shadows of a half-collapsed hangar. The desert wind howled through broken steel beams. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice carrying only to them. "This leak isn't just betrayal. It's strategy. Someone wants this war dragged out. Someone profits from keeping us bleeding." Green spat in the sand. "Contractors. Politicians. Pick your poison." "But we've got proof," Diaz added, holding up the flash drive like a talisman. "If we get this back to the right people, the whole rotten chain comes down." Ramirez shook her head. "And who do we trust with it? Everyone above us is compromised." The question hung heavy, unanswered. Finally Connors said, "Then we take it higher than anyone expects. Outside the chain. Straight to the Pentagon if we have to." Ramirez studied him. "And if they come for us before we get there?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Then we go down fighting, but at least we don't go down blind." That night, Ramirez stood alone on the perimeter, the desert stretching endless under the moon. She traced the scar on her side absent-mindedly, the one they had laughed at back home, the one that had once marked her as broken. Now it felt like something else. A reminder that she'd already been to hell and walked back. Footsteps approached. "Yes." He leaned on the sandbag wall beside her, silent for a long moment before speaking. "You ever think about quitting?" he asked quietly. She smirked without humor. "Every day. But then I remember Ellis' laugh. And I remember the look on Harlow's face when we caught him. And I know, if I quit they win." Diaz nodded slowly. "Then we don't quit." The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was a vow. At dawn, Connors made his move. Using the stolen comms codes, he transmitted a single message out of the desert, bouncing it off an encrypted satellite band that bypassed Division HQ entirely. The message carried the proof, the names, the orders, everything. But as the signal beamed skyward, the base alarm shrieked again. Enemy mortars whistled through the sky, slamming into the sand just outside the wire. The squad scattered to fighting positions as explosions tore through tents. Insurgents swarmed the perimeter, more organized than any attack they'd faced. Ramirez fired until her rifle clicked dry, then slammed in another mag. Dust and smoke choked the air. Connors barked orders, Diaz roared curses from the turret, Green dragged a wounded private behind cover. And through it all, Ramirez felt it. The enemy wasn't here to take the base. They were here for her. A mortar cratered the wall beside her, throwing her into the dirt. Ears ringing, lungs burning, she rolled onto her side and saw them. 3 insurgents breaking through the smoke, eyes fixed on her. Time slowed. She raised her rifle, but one lunged first, knife flashing. The blade scraped her armor as she twisted, jamming her rifle upward. The burst took him down. The second rushed. She drove her boot into his knee, swung the rifle stock across his jaw, fired once into his chest. The third raised his weapon, then dropped in a spray of blood as Diaz's turret thundered from above. Ramirez staggered to her feet, chest heaving. Her ribs burned, her scar screamed, but she stood. The attack raged for another hour before the insurgents broke, fading back into the desert. The base was scarred, smoking, bodies littered across the sand. Connors found her leaning against a wall, sweat streaking grime down her face. He looked her over, then at the battlefield. "They didn't come for the base," he said quietly. "No," Ramirez replied, her voice flat. "They came for me." And though the dawn light broke across the desert, painting the sky in fire, Ramirez felt no warmth. The war had shifted. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was a target. And the enemy, whoever pulled the strings, wouldn't stop until she was gone. The night was darker than any Sarah had lived through in her months of deployment, a blackness that seemed to swallow even the pale gleam of the moon. Her squad lay scattered across the shattered compound, exhausted and hollow-eyed after days of battle. Smoke lingered from smoldering walls, and the scent of blood mixed with burned cordite clung to their uniforms. She leaned against a broken doorway, her rifle balanced across her lap, her fingers trembling, not from fear but from the adrenaline crash that followed their desperate defense. Around her, the men tried to rest, but none could truly sleep. The war never allowed that kind of peace. Captain Ramirez sat near the center, his voice low as he murmured with the radioman. Sarah caught pieces. Reinforcements delayed, supply lines cut, command hesitant to send support into the inferno this valley had become. She stared at him, the weight of his words landing like stones in her chest. They were alone. Again. And now the burden of survival pressed harder than ever. Mason walked past her, dragging his rifle sling over his shoulder, muttering under his breath. Whole damn countries turned against us. We bleed, we fight, we bury friends, and for what? So Brass can hesitate. His bitterness cut through the silence, drawing a few weary nods. No one had the strength to argue. Sarah pulled her sleeve back, her fingers brushing over the tattoo inked into her forearm. The emblem of her unit, worn proudly by each of them, was smeared with grime and blood, but it was still there, still sharp, still theirs. It reminded her of the promises they had made when they first came together. Promises to watch each other's backs, to walk through hell as one. She whispered the words to herself like a prayer. Suddenly, the night cracked with the sharp staccato of gunfire. Everyone snapped to alert, rifles raised, hearts pounding. From the east, muzzle flashes lit the darkness, growing closer by the second. Ramirez barked orders, his voice cutting through chaos like a blade. Positions. Cover the perimeter. Don't let them breach. Sarah scrambled into place beside Mason, her cheek pressed against the stock of her rifle as she aimed into the black. Figures surged out of the shadows. Insurgents, countless silhouettes rushing forward with deadly determination. The fight slammed into them like a tidal wave. Tracers burned across the compound, grenades exploded in bursts of fire, walls collapsed under the assault. Sarah fired until her weapon overheated, smoke curling from the barrel. Mason cursed beside her, reloading, his knuckles split and bleeding. Soldiers screamed, both hers and theirs, cries lost beneath the thunder of war. A round tore into the wall near her head, showering her with shards of brick. She ducked, heart hammering, then popped back up to return fire. The battle felt endless. Minute after minute dragged by like years, each second carved from raw nerve and fury. When at last the insurgents faltered, pulling back into the shadows, Sarah's ears rang with the hollow silence that followed. She lowered her rifle with shaking arms, blinking through sweat and dust. Bodies lay strewn across the compound floor. Friends she had spoken with hours earlier now still and silent, their lifeblood soaking into the dirt. Her throat tightened as she knelt beside Corporal Jenkins, his eyes glassy, his chest unmoving. He had always joked about retiring to a ranch back home, raising horses. She closed his eyes with trembling fingers, whispering, "You deserved better than this." Ramirez moved among the survivors, his expression carved from stone. "We hold until dawn," he said simply. "No matter the cost." That cost came swiftly. The enemy attacked again before the first hint of light touched the horizon. They came harder, more relentless, forcing the squad into tighter positions. Ammo dwindled. The medic's hands shook as he patched wounds with bandages already soaked red. Sarah fought like a machine, her mind narrowing to the rhythm of survival. Aim, fire, reload, repeat. Every pull of the trigger was another second bought for the people beside her. But no machine lasts forever. A blast tore through the barricade near her position, hurling Sarah to the ground. Her ears screamed with the shockwave, vision blurring as debris rained over her. She struggled to rise, pain lancing her side. Through the haze she saw Mason, his mouth moving, shouting her name, dragging her upright. She forced herself back into the fight, her rifle pressed into her shoulder despite the agony in her ribs. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, the world looked painted in fire and blood. Smoke curled upward in black pillars. The compound, once a fragile sanctuary, was reduced to rubble. Yet somehow, impossibly, they were still alive. The insurgents withdrew, melting into the hills. Their attack had failed, but the silence left in its wake was not victory. It was devastation. Ramirez gathered them, the survivors huddled in a broken circle. Half their squad was gone. Supplies were nearly depleted. Reinforcements were still nowhere in sight. The captain's voice was hoarse, stripped of anything but truth. "We can't hold this ground. If we stay, we die. We move out, regroup, and fight another day." Arguments broke out, some too exhausted to move, others too furious to abandon what they had bled for. Sarah listened, her heart heavy. She thought of Jenkins, of every name and face now etched into her memory. Leaving felt like betrayal, but staying meant feeding more bodies to the earth. She clenched her fists, her tattoo burning beneath her skin. Their emblem wasn't about ground or territory. It was about them, about survival, about enduring together. She stood, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. We carry them with us. Every step we take, every fight we survive, they're there. This isn't defeat. It's survival. And survival means we get the chance to make this count. Silence followed her words. Then Mason spoke, his tone softer than she'd ever heard it. She's right. We walk out of here, we're not running, we're bringing them with us. Ramirez nodded, grim but resolute. Pack light. We leave in 20. They moved through the ruins, gathering what little they could. Sarah slung her rifle, adjusting the straps across her aching shoulders. Her body screamed for rest, but her spirit burned with stubborn fire. As they stepped out into the open valley, leaving the compound behind, she glanced back only once. The smoke rose into the sky, a silent marker of sacrifice. She whispered a promise to the dead, "We'll carry you. Always." The journey through the valley was brutal. Heat bore down on them, their canteens nearly empty. Every shadow felt like an ambush waiting to strike. They moved in silence, every soldier locked inside their own ghosts. Hours stretched into a day, then another. They pushed through hunger, through exhaustion, their bodies fraying at the edges of endurance. At night, they huddled in silence, the stars above offering no comfort. Sarah lay awake, staring upward, wondering if anyone back home would ever know what truly happened here. On the third day, they stumbled into a narrow ravine, its walls offering a fragile shelter. Ramirez called a halt, his voice a whisper of fatigue. They dropped their packs, too weak to do more than breathe. Sarah pressed her back to the cool stone, closing her eyes. For a moment she felt the weight of despair pressing hard. Then she heard it, the low hum of an engine. Her eyes snapped open. The sound grew louder, closer, until dust swirled above the ridge. A convoy appeared, armored vehicles rumbling into view. Relief surged through her, so fierce it almost broke her. Reinforcements. Finally. The convoy halted, soldiers pouring out, their faces wide-eyed as they took in the ragged survivors. A medic rushed forward, kneeling beside Sarah, but she pushed his hands away long enough to stand tall. She wanted them to see. She wanted them to know they hadn't broken. One of the newcomers, a grizzled sergeant with a chest full of ribbons, stared at her forearm, at the tattoo smudged but still clear. His expression shifted from curiosity to silence, his voice caught in his throat. He didn't laugh. He didn't mock. He simply saluted, his hand trembling slightly as it rose. The others followed, a ripple of respect spreading through the convoy. Sarah returned the gesture, her heart swelling with something beyond words. They had survived the valley. They had carried their dead. And though the war was far from over, though new battles waited beyond every horizon, in that moment, Sarah knew they had already carved something eternal into history. As the vehicles roared to life, carrying them toward safety, she rested her head against the steel wall, eyes closing. For the first time in weeks she allowed herself to breathe. But deep within she felt the war's shadow still clinging, whispering promises of more to come. The mystery of survival wasn't over. It was only beginning. The end.